Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedules today to join our panel session on getting your insights team from A to digital. I know that some of us have been very busy taking care of small children, becoming part-time school teachers, kind of finding shared workspaces with our significant others while all managing our day-to-day workload. So needless to say, I think we've really become experts at multitasking. And with that being said, we certainly appreciate the ability to have these virtual events, to be able to connect with our industry leaders. And we're very thankful to have some amazing insight leaders on the virtual stage with us today. My name is Candace Coltrane. I'm VP of Business Development here at AYTM. I've worked within market research for the past 12 years, but most recently, I've worked very closely with Fortune 500 brands and helping them as they make the shift to agile research. And really that's through the use of digital technology. A lot of that we'll talk about today, but it really allows clients to make quicker, more qualified business decisions. With me today, I have Eliza Jacobs. Eliza, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Candace. Thanks for having me today. Hey, everyone. Good to see you. So I'm the Director of Consumer Insights and Analysis at PBS, where I primarily manage our Consumer Insights Research Panel, our PBS viewers like you, aka our viewer panel. This is my second experience at PBS, so I've been back for about 5 years. I'm a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and then got my master's at Georgetown, and I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, so I'm a big Bills, Sabres, and Snowstorm fan, and I now live in Alexandria, Virginia with my husband and our 2 kids.
Wonderful. Thanks, Eliza. And we also have Danny Blatt with Prudential. Danny, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Candace. Hi, I'm Danny Blatt. I'm VP of Market Research for Prudential. I lead the research business consulting practice, and I am directly responsible for brand marketing and direct-to-consumer research insights. I'm relatively new to financial services. I've been in the industry almost 3 years now. Spent the majority of my career in CPG and at Unilever. And it's been an interesting transition to financial services. And what I've learned is that although the verticals are very different, the need for human insights and human connections are the same, and it's all about driving better experiences and better outcomes for people. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You said it perfectly there, Danny. And also we have AYTM's Vice President of Research, Stephanie Vance, joining us today. She's going to be sharing some interesting data from our consumer tracking report that we've been running for the last few months, and really just kind of complement some of the learnings that we hear today from Danny and Eliza. So Stephanie, if you'd like to say hello.
Hey, everybody, excited to be here and just listen in and participate as relevant. So
wonderful. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. So the time has come for all insights leaders to really lead the charge towards digital. This is nothing new. I'm sure you've all been hearing about digital transformation for quite some time now. And I really ask you to ask yourself, if you haven't started that transformation, why? And hear a lot of what we're going to talk about today and really try to relate that to what's happening in your own organization. A lot of during the current events, it left a lot of insights teams really scratching their heads and, asking themselves, should we pause research altogether until things go back to normal? But those who had already adapted and transformed their insights teams to more of an agile approach, with those methods, they were able to really just quickly pivot without losing much ground at all. So let's start with our first question. Danny, can you talk us through what insight challenges you and your specific industry faced during the past few months and some of the ways that you were able to strategically approach those?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, before the pandemic, Prudential was already down the path of digital conversion. Certain marketing teams, product development teams, and our insights team for sure had already moved to digital and an agile approach. Of course, to varying degrees, depending on exactly which business unit you were in and how you were supporting it. But the places where you'd already moved, it was very much business as usual. Deliver insights, move the project forward. How can we move on to the next thing? So it just felt very natural, the change or the evolution. But where we hadn't gone completely digital, we really had to reevaluate the questions we were asking and the types of insights we felt comfortable continuing to get. And what I mean by that, or to be specific there, is certain questions like future purchase consideration are already difficult for consumers and participants to predict and think about, but certainly then in the throes of a pandemic became nearly impossible to predict your future self and how you might behave. So we really put the brakes on any type of research that had that sort of tint to it. And we looked instead at research that was more about product design or product development, things that we felt we could still get really reliable insights for. And there we continued very much business as usual. So the way I would say there is the long-term traditional projects, we either needed to pause or to rethink, but the stuff that was already digital, we were able to continue. But then thinking about some of the other challenges we had, it was also about, we observed very early on a critical widening of the already existing wealth gap as a result of the pandemic. So on one hand, you have wealthy individuals who certainly their lives were thrown into different places. You know, they were working from home, teaching from home, parenting from home, but they still had their jobs. They still had their livelihoods. And in fact, they were looking for growth opportunities, how they could actually do better coming out of the pandemic. But on the other side of it, you had people on the other side of the wealth spectrum who were really struggling just to pay the bills, to put food on the table. And they're in a very different place. And you really have to be sensitive to both of those issues as you do your research and as you respond as a business. So from an insights perspective, we had to advise the business on how to respond carefully, thoughtfully, sensitively, but also effectively, because we still have goals and objectives to hit. And as Prudential says, it's our job to help solve the financial challenges of the changing world. And it was really a good place for insights to lean in and help the business.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. It's just summarized it so well and very specific to your industry. And so with Eliza, you work in a very different world within media broadcasting. So the same question to you, what specific challenges did you face, during the past few months, and really how did you strategically approach those?
Yeah, so, it's interesting to think back sort of mid-March when we all had been at the Quirks event actually in Brooklyn the week before the world fell apart. And one thing that we noticed right away when basically everyone was sent home, their kids were sent home, is that you saw people were watching a lot more television across all platforms, and particularly on streaming and sort of and apps and other sort of devices. And so, we were riding that wave. We were happy with it because everyone wants to see their consumption numbers up, whether it's on TV, broadcast TV, or on whatever device. It doesn't matter. So, but what we've seen now, and we typically see in the summer, is there's a seasonality. So fewer people are watching TV because, of course, they're on vacation, things like that. And actually, those sort of broadcasting levels have returned to that seasonal normal for the summer because states are reopening and localities are reopening and people are starting to go out. Streaming numbers are still pretty high and higher than last year. So that's great. But, PBS faced some challenges. This is our 50th anniversary, so we are a legacy broadcaster. And I think that we've risen to those challenges. One thing that, I know I faced, and I'm sure many others did, is that my 10-year-old was sent home from school, and we thought he was going to go back, and then school closed for the rest of the year. And fortunately, our school district was able to offer distance learning plans, but not every school district was able to do that. And I think the vast majority of school-age kids were at home then for the rest of the year. And some school districts said, hey, we can't offer distance learning, but if you need resources, particularly for your younger kids, so pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, look to PBS Kids because we know they have educational content. Our TV shows are developed with a curriculum in mind that meets educational standards. There are games and apps associated with each show. And so that was a real sort of moment for us, I think, to rise to the occasion. Our kids team also developed a newsletter that parents and caregivers can subscribe to that delivers daily tips about how, activities, if you need some activity ideas, because I know I sure did with our 4-year-old, and just different ways you can engage your kids in ways that it still gives them some sort of educational value, even if they're not in the classroom. For our general audience side, it was definitely more challenging. There were some shows that were in production out in the field that then had to come back and basically shut down. And short term, I think we're okay. It's going to be interesting in early 2021 to see if we can get back on schedule. I'm not sure. But we actually have made some adjustments, which is great, including to one initiative that we have going on called PBS American Portrait, which is largely user-generated content driven. You can go to the website and check it out. You can submit something and respond to a prompt. And that was primarily supposed to be an online initiative. There's going to maybe be a couple of episodes based on what we received from the American people. And the idea is sort of trying to create this portrait of what it means to be an American. But instead, our programming team just put together a couple new prompts in, sort of reaction to what has been going on, both coronavirus, even the last few weeks was sort of the protests and the marches and looking at what's been going on. And now we had an episode in May looking at coronavirus. I think we're going to do something again in the coming months. And so I think was great to see how we rose to the challenge as opposed to, I don't want to say opportunistic because I think that has a negative connotation, but it's really sort of observing what's happening and reacting very quickly, which frankly for PBS and how we normally operate, that was very different.
Right, and I think that's good. Well, we're actually going to talk a little bit about that proactive need for research versus reactive later. So you bring up a really good point there. Stephanie, you and your team of researchers have been running the consumer tracker since the end of May. Curious what findings you may be able to speak to briefly around how that's impacted various consumers' behaviors and how that's changed over the past few months.
Sure. Happy to. So one thing I can definitely kind of relate to and speak to is what Danny was talking about with regard to the economic challenges that lower income households are experiencing, as compared to higher income households. And we definitely see that just every wave that we run and across so many metrics. Lower income households are more likely to be personally worse off today economically versus a year ago. They're more likely to express direct concern about their personal and their immediate family's economic well-being than higher income folks. And they're also more likely to be in those job loss numbers than our higher income folks are. And so we see these same trends among younger individuals versus older individuals as well. But for higher income individuals, what we really see related to the economic impact tends to be more conceptual concern for the national economy, concern for the global economy, things like that. I don't have a lot to relate back to Eliza, what you were talking about with broadcast in particular, except to say PBS Kids has been a godsend for me, mom of a preschooler, so I appreciate that.
Good to hear.
One other thing that I would mention, I think that's been really cool info for me as a research geek is to see all of the interesting things that are happening around brand switching. A lot of the work I do sits in CPG space. So Danny, from your previous life, you'll be familiar. But seeing so much changing and brand switching, shopping behavior in general. And I think at like a different time pre-COVID, we probably could have said pretty easily and accurately that the brand you buy most often is your preferred brand. That's a good stand-in for each other, those types of metrics. But right now we're seeing that people are buying non-preferred brands, non-typical brands for a host of reasons. Things like stockouts, sometimes it's value or cost driven, sometimes it's about performance, and sometimes it's just about variety during this time when daily life is kind of tedious. And so seeing all of this change and trying to understand, how much of this is going to stick around versus revert back over time is really interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that really points to why it's so imperative right now to continue to track the consumer because they're changing even more quicker than many years past. So, Danny, you had commented on something I want to bring up because I think that this is really important to all industries right now. It's really around the level of sensitivity when you're looking to connect with various audiences. The world as we know it today is extremely different than it was just a few months ago. So to kind of turn a bit to Eliza, how has PBS adjusted your way of asking questions and some of the various initiatives that you're running in Insight to ensure that you're being sensitive to the current economic environment as well?
Sure. So I guess in early April, we did field the study to our viewer panel, and it was about coronavirus and just sort of getting a sense of how our Insights community was feeling, how they're personally impacted. And this was very early on, and we haven't refielded it, but we're thinking about it because now we're several months in at this point. And really just to say, how long do you think it'll last? What types of things have you done to sort of keep yourself safe? So are you, that was before every state shut down, basically, most states. And we did give them the option, say, hey, do you want to opt out from any studies for the next month? And I mean, assuming that we were going to be in a better place in early May than we were in early April, which we weren't necessarily. And just to make sure we were respecting people, because we don't know on that individual level what people are going through, particularly media consumers. I mean, maybe at the financial level, industry, you hear a little bit more directly, but we really don't. And very few people actually chose to opt out from any studies, and we've been busier than ever, which is great. And our internal clients are keeping us busy. But I would say we haven't, and this actually came up recently, fielded a study about anything recently in the last few weeks, and sort of looking at race relations in the U.S. and things like that. That is obviously a very sensitive topic. There's a lot going on right now, and I think we just want to make sure if we do field something to our community that we're very thoughtful about it, and we make sure that we were respectful to all of our community members.
Great. And it's interesting enough. So Dan, when we spoke earlier, you talked a lot about how the approach hasn't changed, but the way that you're segmenting and analyzing the data has. Can you go into a little bit more depth about how you're, what that means?
Yeah, for sure. And that's exactly right. The approach stayed the same, but as we said, there's a widening wealth gap, and what people are prepared to do and thinking about doing is very different. So like I mentioned, the way you message them has to change, but also the way you think about them has to be very different to connect on a human level. And we know that just saying our customers or our consumers or our prospects think a certain way is not going to cut it at all anymore. So we're being very specific in our audience segmentation and what we're trying to achieve. And I think it's important that the fundamentals of market research, we've really had to double down on and lean in on, in the sense that what are we trying to do? What do they think now? And what do we want them to think? And who is it targeting? Because I think in this hyper-fragmented market or this widening fragmentation, we have to be very clear about that. Otherwise, you could really find yourself in some trouble. So we've really taken a much more detailed approach to the segmentation, I would say.
Right, absolutely. And so Steph, any insight in various approaches that you're seeing with our own current clients as well?
Yeah, I think one thing that we really learned to do, did you ask me that question, Candace?
Yes.
One thing that we learned to do internally and that we've advised our clients on a lot is just to be really straightforward about grounding behavioral and even attitudinal questions in right now and giving respondents, our fellow humans, the acknowledgement that the deeply weird times in which we find ourselves. So saying, we know we're asking you about behavior that's in flux due to COVID, just being open about that. And just asking, tell us how you do things now. Tell us what brands you buy now. Not asking them to do that heavy lifting of 6 months ago, what were you doing? And tell us what you're doing now. And then putting the onus on them to provide that comparison. Instead, just collecting the data that they can answer easily. And if we need to know how it's different, then we ask, why are you doing that now? And that's how we get that additional information about change over time. And so just being respectful of their experience, because it's like our experience. It's different and it's weird and it's hard for a lot of people.
Yep. Absolutely. And so when we talk about digital transformation, which is a lot of what we're focused on here, excuse me, Danny, when we spoke earlier, you said, what does digital transformation mean to Prudential, right? Because it means something different to every company. And I do have to say that it's a term that's kind of thrown around, often in the industry now. And so help us understand, what it means for you at Prudential and the types of research projects that maybe transitioned to digital even within the past few months.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is funny, digital became a fat word, right? We don't mean digital, or at least in Prudential, we don't mean like the switch from paper and pencil questionnaires to online surveys. It's really more about the state of mind and your approach being much more agile and quick and being able to feed into the product development and the marketing cycle in a very different way. And the way we've adapted is really about providing bite-sized, snackable insights that are very sharp and quick and easily infused into the next sprint or the next planning session or the next iteration of the product or the message. And the reason that's important is because they're moving very fast. And if we were to take too long with any one insight, the train has moved already. So instead, we've taken a true iterative testing approach where you give one insight, you launch that insight, and then you test again and you iterate on that to really get to the game changer or the step change rather than looking each thing to be a major impactful move. And then on the other side of that, it's how we share those insights, because that also has to change in concert with it. It's no longer always about, developing 50-page decks, that beautiful PowerPoint decks that take 2 weeks to develop, to share. Instead, we're heavily reliant now on dashboards. We're democratizing the data, getting it out there quickly, and really sharing it so that it can be infused as quickly as possible. And then, of course, coming back to it and then doing the more in-depth analysis as appropriate. To go along with that, we have a digital knowledge management platform, which we've been using for quite some time, which is really powerful for people to go in and see what we've done in the past. Because one of the things you're always scared of when you do these quick iterative tests is that you keep learning the same thing over and over again rather than moving on to the new thing. So with our digital knowledge management tool, we're able to do that very well. And through something like this pandemic, we really used it to highlight the key pieces of information we thought relevant stakeholders needed at that moment, and used it to promote it and get it out there as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. But we also know that not everyone has time to go into the digital knowledge management tool. So the other thing we did is we started creating these bite-sized emails that we would send out to relevant stakeholders 2, maybe 3 times a week. We didn't want to overdo it and get people bored of our emails. But each of those emails contained 1 or 2 data points with 1 or 2 insights that were really about what can you do, how is this relevant for your business, and what should your next step be? And we've seen really positive response from that because, again, we're making it so that it's very easily actionable on the spot.
That's really great insight. And I think I'm going to have to steal your term of bite-sized snackable insight and use that more often. We'll have to coin that one in the industry. Eliza, you're specifically responsible for managing the PBS internal community. Did you see any shifts in the way that you are approaching digital insights using that panel that has changed over the past few months?
Yeah, so we're pretty lucky in that we've had our online community. It's been in existence for, I think, like almost 15 years, which is great. Think back of where online research was 15 years ago, and it's totally different. But our audience is different now, and audiences are in many more places. So it was great that we've had this community for so long. It was initially made up of primarily people we've recruited in who watched on broadcast only because, of course, that's what the option was. Now, we need to make sure that we have members of our audience who are on every platform. So whether it's they primarily watch our channel on Roku or they're YouTube TV subscribers or whatever it is, we've had to be very intentional about when we are recruiting in new members to our community that we are making sure we are. Perhaps we're just targeting people who from our streaming lists or things like that, because we want to make sure we have enough of those people there as television audiences shift. For us, we're very quant-based because we have this community, but we do online discussions, things like that. We haven't done those recently because it requires more lift, but something I would love to see us do more of is leveraging our community to help inform sort of campaigns that PBS is going out with. So things like, this is one of my favorite things we did, and it's now 4 years old, which seems like forever ago. But in 2016, in the lead up to PBS was creating its spots for a promotional spot for their news and elections coverage in the previous presidential election, we actually went out to members of our community and said, hey, tell us if you watch PBS NewsHour or any PBS News content, like, why do you watch it? What do you like about it? And they submitted videos, and then we cut some of those videos together, and that became the spot that we used to promote, our coverage of the conventions and election night and things like that. So I think I would love to see us do more of that, where we're leveraging our community, not just for, give us respond to some surveys, but really engaging them, getting to actually see what they look like, and helping them be more of a part of what PBS does overall, out in the public.
Right. And so much of what you're saying, I think, really lends nicely into the next topic around, I mentioned this prior, is just with the pandemic, I think one thing that it has done, it has shined a major light on the requirement for research to be proactive and not reactive. And it's important for insights teams to understand really, what does that mean? How does your day-to-day job change with that? Are you now arming yourself in advance when you go into meetings with your various brand teams and having direct access to data where you're starting to answer the questions before you even realize, your teams even realize that they have those questions, right? That is so important nowadays. And so, with Eliza, what practical advice would you give to those in the audience here, how to remain proactive within insights?
For me, I think one of the biggest things is just listening. When you go into a meeting, and I know sometimes we're all overscheduled and meetings are very different now that we're all at home and it's like video meeting fatigue. But a lot of things I find are said, and maybe it's an offhanded comment, or it's not, it's just really quick, but that can turn into a major project. And sometimes people don't realize that's going to happen. And it happened to us a few weeks ago. I was just sitting in this listening in on a weekly meeting that I never say anything at this meeting, but I like to listen in because this happens. And someone mentioned a new initiative called Pride Land, which is it's actually a digital series on PBS Digital Studios, which is a network on YouTube, and we have a bunch of channels. But it's on one of our channels on PBS Digital Studios, and there wasn't one broadcast episode associated with it, but it's this initiative, and it's really looking at the LGBTQ community in the South. And I'd heard nothing about this, and I was like, well, this is different for PBS. I think that this is not, when people think of PBS, it may not be that they expect this type of content from us, particularly when it's a digital first series. And so as soon as we got out of that meeting, I sent an email to the head of digital studios, and I just said, hey, we should talk about this because we really can help you. We can help you. We can do a survey we can recruit people to watch the broadcast episode, which we did, and then send them a survey after that. We can also, help you craft a different survey for your digital studios users, so the people who are watching it on YouTube. And it can really sort of get some feedback for them as they plan on another season, which I think they are definitely going to go forward with. But just an example like that, where it was a little comment that was made and it really caught my ear. And, it should really help inform the strategy going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And Danny, any practical advice you can share as well?
Yeah, for us, it's about being very tied to the business objectives. We set our research agenda about 12 months in advance, very tied to to what the business is trying to achieve. So, of course, the 12-month planning is not actually what we do. The tactics change. But as long as we're really tied to those business objectives, we find that the insights carry legs, even as things shift, even through things as crazy as a coronavirus pandemic. And for example, some of our longer term tracking studies that we do to monitor the financial wellness of Americans and things like that, we were able to just field quick pulse studies along the way, along this pandemic, to see how people are feeling and how perceptions are changing. So although that research ended up being a bit reactive, because we were proactive and strategic in the way we thought about it, we're able to give in the moment insights to the business.
Absolutely. And finally, Steph, before we move into the last question, any other additional information, you're working very closely with our clients, anything that you share with them, as it relates to being more proactive?
Definitely. I think the question that we got the most, and particularly kind of at the very beginning of coronavirus hitting the US, was like, can we do research? And if we can, what can we do? Which is a very fair reaction, and kind of what we figured out over time, both just collaboratively with clients and also just kind of putting on your thinking cap. is just there are evergreen kinds of research, things like concept tests and claims and feature prioritization, product and service optimization. By and large, we're seeing that consumers are still consuming. And so we need to build and produce offerings that meet their needs and surprise and delight them. And that requires research a lot of the times. But there is research that you may need to pause, right? Like this isn't maybe the best time to do a huge exploration of white space in a category or a huge consumer customer segmentation, things that are meant to be done once and then provide fodder for a long period, because this is a time of change. So, just guidance around what can we do and should we do versus the kinds of things to hold on.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So as we head into this last question, I want, those of you brand researchers in the audience to really think about how this specifically relates to your organization, especially as you're considering to possibly make a move to digital. One of the things that I hear most often from potential clients is, lack of a cultural shift wanting to take place in your organization. And that could be why it's so difficult to go down the digital transformation path. So I'm going to start with you, Danny. What are some of the top questions and concerns that you hear from stakeholders around supporting digital?
So Prudential is nearly 150 years old, which means we have lots of legacy systems and things all over the enterprise which need to be merged. And Prudential is known to be a slow and deliberate company to make big changes. But that being said, we are committed at the most senior levels to the digital transformation. So it's going to happen, and it's going to happen well. But what is interesting, what this crisis sort of showed us, is that it accelerated our digital transformation 100 times the speed we were planning, maybe. And not only did we survive, or are we surviving, but we're actually thriving in this new work environment and figuring everything out. So although there are concerns and challenges, I see us pushing through and doing great. What the biggest hurdle now is, I think something we all deal with as researchers, is we've created a behavior change. Now, how do we get that to be persistent? Even when you're able to slide back, how do we maintain that behavior change in the new world?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know you alluded to this, Eliza, earlier, but, being PBS, being a legacy broadcast company, you've been forced into the digital side of the business, for common practice at this point. But how has it impacted your insights team shift to digital? And, what are you hearing from your leaders about that transition?
Yeah, it's interesting to be 50. PBS is 50. It looks young compared to Danny, what Danny's dealing with. But we are this bizarre, in a way, federated system where we've got a headquarters and then 330 member stations. So you've got what's going on, what I'm dealing with at national level, and then there's a system out there that we also have to help inform what we do at the headquarters level as it trickles down to the stations. I think in general, our marketing team has had this perspective of digital first, more so than our programming team. That's not a knock on the programming team. I just think they're kind of learning to come together and make something work. And our chief digital marketing officer, he believes digital first because that's where consumers are going. And at some point, they will be there primarily. Our kids have already made this transition. Kids are now, the crossover has happened. They are now consuming television on streaming services and apps more than they are on broadcast television. And we originally projected that to happen, I think, this summer or next summer, and it's already happened. So things are happening at a faster rate. I think it's really thinking about, we're not programming just for broadcast television. You have to think about people want to be able to watch whatever it is they want to watch on any platform at any time. So they may not want to go to television at 9 o'clock. They may want to watch it on an app or, somewhere else, Netflix, whatever strategic partner we have, immediately. So it's really, whenever we're structuring a project, we have to think about where are all the places people could be consuming this content, right, and how can we help inform a marketing strategy, yes, for broadcast, but also for other places and on social. And so it's a lot to bring into one sort of place, but I think we're making progress. at least at the headquarters level. The stations is a totally different thing, and that's another conversation for another day.
Absolutely, and thank you, for all of that feedback. And I think, here at AYTM, obviously, digital insights is very near to us. We're a digital insights provider. But when you think about the transformation, it's much broader than just a technology platform, right? And it's making sure that, like I mentioned before, it's ensuring that cultural shift and that leadership and stakeholders are open to that. But also ensuring that you have the right partner to guide and to lead you and to really help you reach that destination. So I would definitely, consider thinking about that as you look to for those out there who are looking to make that digital shift. And we have just a few last minutes left. I want to make sure we do have some time for Q&A. And before we jump over to that, just wanted to mention that AYTM is hosting monthly roundtable events with client-side insights leaders, very similar to what we did today, but more behind virtual closed doors. We really want it to be an open dialogue for just questions that are surfacing in the industry, what's working, what's not, just general issues. And if you're interested, please reach out to me following this panel on LinkedIn, or you could actually just click on the chat box. There's a link to join our insider community. Thank you so much again for joining us, and let's go ahead and see if we have any questions.
So again, please feel free to send questions through the chat bar just over here on your right-hand side of your screen. We'll go ahead and prompt this over here to the team to answer any questions you have.
Well, with the last few minutes, obviously, thank you, Danny, Eliza, and Stephanie. If there's any other last thoughts or, more advice that you'd like to kind of give out to the audience, please feel free to do so. It looks like we had a couple questions come through. For Eliza, how do you address the change in devices available to view content? In other words, does device drive content watched or vice versa?
Oh yeah, that's I think it's the content still. I think that people want good content, and they have very high standards, and so I still think that it's the content that is sort of driving that. You just need to make sure that content is available everywhere at any time, and that's really the sort of struggle from, I think, the media distributor or content developer side. But I still think it's the content is primary there.
Mm-hmm. And Danny, I'm curious, Sarah's student asked, I'm curious what range of non-digital things are most missed? Or said in another way, which ones had the most angst around change?
I think it's the dissemination of insights through dashboards as opposed to in-person PowerPoint, if I'm understanding the question right. I think people like that face-to-face connection where you have an insight professional who digs through every piece of data, puts together a very clean story, and shares that. And asking people to sort of go into a dashboard and just pull the data points they need, provide some angst on both sides, because now I'm worried that the data is going to be misinterpreted or misused, and they're concerned that they're outside of their field of study, let's say, and can make the wrong decisions. So that's still something that we're learning through the best way to approach. But I definitely think that there's a lot of advantage to democratizing the data, but be aware of the pitfalls.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful. I think we're out of time here, but thank you again so much for joining. If you have any questions, please feel free to follow up. And thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.